The plane was poised for takeoff, and passengers were quietly settling into their seats. Among them, Elijah Carter, an elderly black man with a lifetime of air travel behind him, clutched his boarding pass with trembling hands. Despite his many flights over the years, something about this journey felt disturbingly different. As the cabin filled with murmurs of anticipation, a flight attendant with a rigid, unyielding demeanor stepped forward. Her eyes narrowed as she addressed him in a tone devoid of warmth. "Sir, you need to leave," she said curtly. Elijah blinked, confusion etched on his lined face. He looked around, noticing that no one else was being confronted. "Excuse me?" he asked softly. "But why?" The attendant folded her arms and replied with a chill, "You're making other passengers uncomfortable." A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Elijah's face lost its color as he struggled to understand what was unfolding. What could possibly have triggered this? Just 5 minutes later, the roles would reverse dramatically, and the flight attendant herself would be publicly humiliated. This is the story that will leave you questioning what justice really means in the skies. Stay with us until the end, and share in the comments where you're watching from today. Elijah Carter had dedicated his life to hard work and education, having retired as a respected history professor. He had always carried himself with dignity and expected to be treated with respect. Today was meant to be a joyful reunion. He had purchased a first-class ticket solely to surprise his granddaughter on her graduation day. The anticipation of seeing her smile had filled him with warmth as he navigated the narrow airplane aisle. Along the way, he exchanged kind nods with a young mother cradling her baby and even offered a gentle smile to the business travelers busy on their laptops. Settling comfortably into his seat and adjusting his reading glasses, Elijah felt ready to enjoy the flight. Yet his calm was abruptly shattered when he noticed a well-dressed woman in her mid-50s seated across the aisle. In hushed tones, she had been speaking to the same flight attendant who now confronted him. Their exchanged glances carried an unspoken message, and soon the attendant made her way to Elijah's row. "Sir," she said again, her voice firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane." Elijah frowned, clearly taken aback. "Excuse me?" "I haven't done anything wrong," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. The attendant's expression hardened further. "There's been a complaint," she insisted. Elijah's heart pounded as he tried to process the words. "A complaint? What complaint?" he murmured, his eyes searching the cabin for some form of support or explanation. The flight attendant's tone turned even sterner. "You don't belong here," she declared. At that moment, a murmur began to ripple through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged uneasy glances, while others shifted in their seats as if trying to distance themselves from the unfolding scene. In a bid to assert his rights, Elijah raised his boarding pass. "Ma'am, I paid for this seat. I have my ticket right here," he said, holding it up as proof. Yet the flight attendant remained unmoved. "Security will escort you off if you do not comply," she warned coolly. Tension grew palpable. The passengers, caught in the crossfire of this uncomfortable moment, watched silently as the confrontation escalated. Suddenly, from a few rows back, a young man in a hoodie stood up. "This is ridiculous," he declared, his voice cutting through the silence. An older woman also spoke up, shaking her head in disapproval. "This is shameful," she said, adding her voice to the chorus of discontent. The flight attendant's face flushed a deep red as she snapped, "This is none of your concern," but the situation was far from over. Elijah's heart pounded with a mix of indignation and fear, not just for himself, but for the dignity that had defined his life. It was clear that what was unfolding was not merely a dispute over a seat, it was a reawakening of a painful history of prejudice. Then, as if summoned by the mounting tension, a commanding voice echoed down the aisle. "Is there a problem here?" It was the captain. The presence of the captain demanded immediate attention and forced a brief pause in the chaos. The flight attendant straightened her posture and responded, "Yes, Captain, this passenger refuses to leave after a complaint was made." The captain's sharp gaze shifted between the flight attendant and Elijah. "What kind of complaint?" he inquired, his tone measured yet firm. There was an uncomfortable pause as the attendant hesitated. "There's been a complaint, sir," she finally managed. The captain, maintaining a calm but authoritative demeanor, turned his attention to the boarding pass Elijah offered. "May I see your ticket?" he asked. Elijah handed it over with slightly shaking hands. After a brief glance, the captain's eyes flickered with disbelief before he addressed the attendant. "Sir, Mr. Carter has a first-class ticket. He is exactly where he belongs." The captain's words cut through the tension like a scalpel. The flight attendant's mouth fell open, stunned into silence. But before she could muster a response, the captain raised his voice further, this time through the intercom. "To all the passengers, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable behavior from a member of our crew," he announced clearly. "It does not reflect our values, and I assure you that this matter will be addressed immediately." A murmur of relief and approval rippled through the cabin as the passengers exchanged looks of solidarity. In the ensuing moments, a supervisor boarded the plane. After a brief, hushed conversation, the flight attendant was instructed to step off the aircraft. "I was just following procedure," she stammered weakly, but the captain cut her off sharply. "No, you were following prejudice." As the attendant was led away, many passengers clapped. Some even rose to their feet in support of Elijah. The tension that had gripped the cabin began to lift, replaced by a collective sense of vindication. Elijah exhaled slowly, the weight of the ordeal easing from his shoulders, though the emotional impact lingered. Seated beside him, a young woman leaned over and whispered, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Elijah managed a small, sad smile. "It has happened before," he replied quietly. "But today, people spoke up, and that made all the difference." The captain's decisive action not only restored Elijah's dignity, but also sent a powerful message. Racism, in all its insidious forms, has no place in our society. In that moment, as the plane finally took off into the sky, a subtle yet profound shift had occurred. The silence that had long allowed prejudice to thrive had been shattered by the courage of one man and the collective voices of the passengers. In the days and weeks that followed, the incident sparked discussions far beyond the confines of that single flight. Passengers recounted the experience to friends, family, and social media networks. Elijah Carter's quiet dignity in the face of injustice became a symbol, a reminder that while the scars of prejudice run deep, the power of speaking up can forge a path toward change. The significance of this event is clear. When we allow silence to prevail, injustice grows unchecked. But when individuals, no matter how small the gesture, speak out against discrimination, they not only reclaim their own dignity, but also light the way for a more just society. As Elijah Carter later reflected quietly to a fellow traveler, "I've seen this hurt before, but today it feels like a turning point." So, what do you think? Was justice truly served in the end? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, this isn't just a story about one flight. It's a call to stand against the quiet acceptance of prejudice wherever it appears. Let us know where you're watching from and what this incident means to you.